Welcome to Recap Planet. Spoilers ahead, so be prepared. Today, we will be recapping the movie Apostle. The film starts as a moody atmospheric mystery, following a man named Thomas who travels to a remote island to search for his missing sister, who a murderous religious cult has kidnapped. Thomas is already on his way to the mysterious and isolated island by train when he hears a voiceover from the letter his sister sent to his father to save her. An associate of his father tells him they thought he was long dead until they tracked him down, as his father is too old and broken. According to the letter, it has now fallen to Thomas to assist his beloved sister, who is being held for ransom by a blasphemous cult. The man instructs Thomas to pay the ransom only after it is confirmed that his sister is alive and to first remain hidden among them. When the cult members arrive at a dock with invitations to the island, Thomas notices an unusual mark on his own invitation and becomes concerned about what it means. Under the pretense of assisting him, he switches his invitation with another man in line. After boarding the boat, the man's luggage is suspiciously marked with a white X. When they arrived on the island, the man was quickly detained and held, obviously believing him to be Thomas to get the ransom money. The new members climbed up the hill to get to the village. The newcomers were asked to express their devotion to the island's god, whom they all worshipped, by dedicating every drop of their blood to her and providing a glass jar as a receptacle. Later, Thomas heard people singing a hymn of some sort. Thomas met Andrea and then went to the local church where the prophet Malcolm, the leader of the group, spoke about the island's ideals of creating a paradise with no war, no taxes, and everyone is treated equally. Malcolm, along with his two brothers, Frank and Quinn, fled England due to religious persecution and arrived on the island. They were saved after hearing the goddess's sweet song beckoning them to the island. Malcolm confronted the man they believed was Thomas, torturing him and demanding the ransom. Malcolm expressed his pleasure at how brutally Quinn had injured him, and because he didn't have the money, he ordered Quinn to slit his throat. That night, after a bell toll, everyone was required to return to their cabins. Instead, Thomas investigated the village, staring through one window and seeing a husband cut his wife's arm and bloodletting it into one of their receptacles. Thomas went to Malcolm's house where he observed him moving a rug, revealing a door on the floor through which he descended, accidentally bumping into a young girl named Fiona. Her boyfriend Jeremy watched from nearby. The two were in a forbidden sexual relationship before marriage, which could become a major issue since it is against the group's rules. Outside each room were glass jars filled with blood, which they devoted to sacrifices for the island goddess. Malcolm poured some from someone else's jar into his own, and while going to open the door, he accidentally cut his finger and blood dripped down on the floor. This caused the movie to be drawn into the cracks of the woods, and a frightening, wild-eyed woman appeared, hungrily gasping for blood. The next morning, Thomas woke up and saw that he had several scars on his back, which appeared to be cross-shaped branding. Jeremy showed up, telling him it was time to work and asking why he was out last night. Thomas turned the same question on him, and they agreed to keep each other's respective nighttime activities a secret. Jeremy asked for help with scavenging on a boat on the beach, and Thomas confronted him about his sister showing him a picture. Jeremy tried to leave in a hurry, but Thomas pinned him to the ground. Eventually, Jeremy admitted that he knew her. He saw her on a boat a month ago, and his father, Frank, said they had no choice but to take her. The crops on the island were failing, and knowing Jennifer's father was rich, they decided to kidnap her to get money to help the island. Beyond the crops, they were unable to find any new livestock as any born were mangled and unable to survive. It seemed like something was crippling their so-called paradise, turning it into an unlivable, hostile environment. It turns out they had even more problems when they learned that someone was out after hours and gathering all of the new villagers to the church. Malcolm sniffed out who didn't belong by reciting a verse from their scripture and going down the line to each man, getting them to continue the words. Thomas became worried as it got closer to his turn, but when they came to the man next to him, he also didn't know the scripture. There was a moment of silence before the man revealed a blade and yelled for a king and country. Thomas held him back, but the man slashed his chest. The guards attacked him all at once, impaling him from every direction with spears. Later, they checked the markings on his blade and found out he was an assassin sent by the king. Attacking the man worked out for Thomas, making him look good to Malcolm and assuring him that his act of bravery wouldn't go unrewarded, even though his identity is still a secret to them. To reveal Thomas, Malcolm brings his sister to the streets and threatens him to pay the ransom, or they'll both be taken to the heathen stand. Thomas freaks out, reaches for his bottle of drugs, furiously tosses it, falls to the ground, and clutches his head, but ultimately decides not to go outside. Jennifer isn't killed, but she's chained up, and the local kids are messing with her, poking her with sticks and such. Quinn complains to Malcolm that they don't have the resources for a big festival, but Malcolm reveals the real reason for the celebration is that it will allow them to search every room in the village to find the money, and then they can deal with both of them. We can see Andrea isn't as cold-hearted as the others, bringing Jennifer some food. Quinn goes to stop her, but Malcolm holds him back, showing he has some compassion, which to Quinn is his weakness. At night, Thomas has some plans of his own during the celebration and wants to find out where the door on the floor of Malcolm's house leads. He gets Jeremy to help him chisel his way into the bricks under the house. Meanwhile, Quinn and Malcolm search Thomas's room and find a map sticking out from his desk showing Malcolm's house. They immediately understand that he's the one they're looking for. Malcolm sends Frank in a hurry over there. Thomas gets inside, and Jeremy replaces the last brick. His father catches him under there and, not wanting harm to come to his son, sends him off before the other two arrive. Thomas continues on, passing what appears to be a moat, but is actually filled with blood and gory bits. He approaches the ladder, where Malcolm is waiting on the other side with a gun. However, he hears his horse neighing and becomes suspicious. Thomas decides to return the way he came and notices Frank following him. He then heads to the river, crawling through it, only to have the same elderly woman from under the floorboards emerge from the water, shrieking and chasing after him. Thomas flees in a hurry and disappears as Frank rounds the corner. Thomas makes it to the other side of the cave where he grabs a bone for protection. He searches the cave walls with a lighter, discovering crude drawings of a white-skinned woman who appears to be worshipped, as well as the word Exodus in the barn where he was originally headed. Malcolm is inside the room, along with the same woman who appears weaker and even more aged than her version seen outside. This implies that there are two different versions of the goddess because it appears that this one can't even go anywhere as she is entangled within the many branches. Malcolm is surprised and disappointed that the woman revealed herself to Thomas, stating that Thomas will not worship her in the same way that he does. He cuts his hand and offers it to the woman as she reaches for his blood, but Malcolm pauses, insisting that he will only feed her if she stops poisoning their crops. As she drinks from Malcolm's blood, the previously dead wood begins to return to a green and lively state. It becomes clear that the villagers are giving up their own blood to feed the goddess in an attempt to keep their island flourishing, but their offerings are no longer enough to make a significant difference, and she is already being brought in more food from a strange source. The next morning, Andrea discovers Thomas and he reveals the source of his scars as well as what led to his path to becoming a drug addict. He explains that, like her, he was a man of God who faithfully led his group into the heart of Peking to bring them the word and love of God, but they, in return, showed him the devil by setting a field on fire. Two men dragged Henry, with both his arms bound by ropes, passing by and killing members of his parish. They pulled him to his knees, and although Thomas tried to pray to God to help them, the men continued to pull his hands apart. Another man obtained a hot cross and used it to brand Thomas's back. As a result of this experience, Thomas lost faith in the divine and associated God only with pain and suffering. When Jeremy arrived in town, his girlfriend informed him that she was pregnant. He told her that Frank wanted him to go to the mainland and stay there, and he wanted her to join him as his wife, saying he had something to give her. He ran off, and Quinn saw him and kicked the door open, violently grabbing his daughter. Quinn told her that she had no idea of the monstrosity that grows inside of her to be born in twisted lumps no mother could call her own, and he wouldn't stand for it any longer, pulling a knife out and going for her. He murdered his own daughter, which was later found by Jeremy when he returned. Quinn blamed him and said he had no choice. Jeremy rushed at him with a razor, and a brutal fight ensued. Jeremy stabbed Quinn in the neck and collapsed in the streets, pleading for help from the others while lying and claiming that Jeremy murdered his girl. He tried to disagree, but it was too late. Guards chased after him. Jeremy ran for his life from the guards and made it to Thomas, telling him of his innocence, but he was caught and taken back to be killed using a purification ritual. Malcolm and Frank showed up, horrified to see what had happened, but Quinn had already declared Malcolm to be a false prophet. Quinn wanted Malcolm to prove himself by killing Thomas, believing him to be here to destroy their way of life. Taking a razor, he gave it to Malcolm to kill Thomas, but he was distracted by a gunshot from Frank saying it had to stop. She must die. Thomas quickly dispatched the guards by turning the poles on them. Frank ran through the woods. When Thomas saw the other version of the goddess walking through the woods, he rushed to the barn. Frank stepped out of the barn, moments later with a bullet hole in his gut. He told Thomas to burn everything down before being shot again. Thomas decided to enter from underneath via the floorboards, while Malcolm and Quinn discovered Frank's dead body. Malcolm said it was over, but there was no turning back for Quinn, who shot Malcolm in the shoulder, causing him to crash into the tunnels and leaving him to die inside. Thomas kept an eye on the area where the goddess appeared to be feeding. The grinder put a funnel over her mouth and filled it with gore bits. As he looked over, He saw 3 hanging bodies and noticed that Jennifer was still alive. She was surprised to see her brother alive. Thomas responded that he was only dead to their father. The grinder struck him from behind with a hammer, causing blood to pour from the wound, knocking him unconscious and stealing Jennifer. He rushed to the ground and hooked the chains around his limbs. The grinder cranked some machinery, and Thomas's hand got caught in it, shredding several of his fingers. He managed to get up and jam one of the chains into the grinder, pulling himself up onto the table. This caused him to convulse, and his eyes turned white. While in town, Quinn kidnapped Andrea and Jennifer. He complained about having to watch these people worship Malcolm all these years and claimed that he was the one who deserved credit for imprisoning the goddess and discovering what she could do for them in the first place. He flashed back to when they first arrived on the island and met her. Thomas fell into the goddess' arms, a strange expression of giddiness on his face before sobbing. She told him to set her free, so he grabbed a lantern and tossed it on the dead growth, which quickly caught fire, spreading from this point through the entire island, including the village, as all of the life here came from her. Thomas surprises Quinn with a knife, and as the two fight on the floor, Jennifer gets his gun but is unable to get a clean shot, so Andrea shoots their chains, freeing them from the wall. Quinn pulls out a knife and repeatedly stabs Thomas in the side, and the girls wrap their chains around Quinn's neck, strangling them as they pull him along the floor, and as they pull, Thomas hangs onto the knife in his body. The entire town abandons the island to get to the boats. As Thomas begins to lose blood from his wounds, he has an emotional final goodbye with his sister before sending them off, and we see the barn blows up with fire. As Malcolm joins Thomas, a drop of his blood falls to the ground, causing a little plant to grow in the ground. They smile at each other as Thomas collapses, roots enter his face, his eyes strange and white again. Finally, the goddess chose Thomas, knowing deep down in him that he was a good faithful man, and transferred her abilities to him. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment and let us know which film you want us to explore next. Take care.